Welcome to Ascend, a podcast where I talk to interesting people building solutions in the cloud. In this episode, I talk with Daniel Simmonds from WaveCastle about building on AWS, early challenges they faced, and how you can help organizations embrace change. We may also have talked a little bit about microbreweries, but we'll save that for another episode. I hope you enjoy it. All right, man. So let's just start with the generic question around kind of why did you end up with deciding with public cloud, and if you wanted to talk about a platform specifically, that's up to you to decide. But why did you kind of make that shift?
Sure. So at the organization, where I'm currently heading up a couple of different cloud initiatives, they, like myself, started in a more traditional data center sort of environment. So private cloud was where in an old Pure One network data center back before it was Aptum. That's where I started my career, and I think that looking at how modern applications are built versus how things were done 15 or 20 years ago. The public cloud specifically, what is at market currently, offers a lot of um, flexibility for going and building and deploying code. And for me, I'm not really a software developer, I'm an application architect. So it is kind of giving me more power with the tools that we have today versus 20 years ago, more power to go and build applications and be involved on to provide business insights, to go and create something and deliver it to end users. The market now in public cloud is ripe to almost democratizing the ability for companies or for individuals like myself who don't necessarily have a software development background to go and build applications and solve problems inside the organization they're working at and go and deliver a product to an end user. So I've been involved with organizations in the past who built large platforms on, .NET and SQL, and looking at we didn't really do anything like that at Beanfield, but looking at what we're doing now, developing an application on a serverless platform, like on AWS serverless products. That's where we've gone. That's really turned the power over to business stakeholders to go and drive the application development process and to figure out what they need to do. So instead of taking, you look at what makes a lot of technology companies successful. Lots of companies have great technology, but if they're not sales or outcome or user driven, the success of that technology, like you can have the best tech in the world, but you don't have great sales. And I think whether you're building an application for an internal audience or an external audience, when you can turn over the keys for development and the power for development to somebody who understands the problem that they're trying to solve from an end user basis first, that'll yield better results than sort of being held captive by, like, you need like DevOps people, you need people who understand application architecture at a much deeper level. So the market right now today is ripe for that democratization to have occurred, which I think it has, and I think we're building applications that way.
Okay, so you said something at the beginning, and I think we have really similar backgrounds. Kind of like I've always been on the architecture side as well. Like, how do we glue
Yeah.
different things together, and how do I get data from point A to point B, maybe between different systems and things like that. So as you started to transition from that more traditional, physical environments, co-location and stuff like that, and you started doing that same type of work on the AWS platform, what were some of the challenges that you ran into early? Like, what were the things that kind of were the first couple hurdles that you had to figure out to make that transition?
So for me, I would say that the challenges were more for the organization that I was working in, jumping to AWS. So like myself, like they were kind of like Microsoft stack heads. They were OG, you know, Active Directory, the monolithic meat and potatoes Microsoft enterprise sort of company, and that was where I started. And that is a very familiar. I remember when we my first like tech job transitioning, like thinking, are we going to move from VMware? Are we going to move to VMware and like not use Hyper-V? Like that was a big, because we're like a Microsoft company. And I think the challenges that we ran into were more, or, you know, with the group that I'm working with currently, was like showing people that not everything needs to be a Microsoft product, or it can be a Microsoft product that is just better. It's offered, the offering that Amazon has, for instance. Like I'm a huge proponent of Amazon directory services. Like the managed active directory product they have is unreal, and it's like it's different than, and I think in a way that Amazon has come to market, and Azure, the products that have come out on Azure, that have been released, they've had there's like a one-upsmanship. Like Amazon has delivered the traditional meat and potatoes Microsoft services so well as a service inside the Amazon environment, that Microsoft has had to make like really kind of bold moves to keep pace with them in the market. So when you look at AWS directory services compared to like Azure ADDS, like one of the, like for me, as somebody who like wants to like log in, if I can, tactile touch an Active Directory server, you can do that with a directory service. And then at the same time, if you want to use Azure ADDS, you're also running a standard Active Directory server that you're hosting in Amazon that needs to be managed by you as part of your organization. So it's like it's a it's not quite as, it's not just not as good as the AWS directory service. Not to pump the AWS tires too much. So for this organization, it was like kind of like going on a journey with the CEO and COO and the tech teams about like, you know, because they have a big, you know, from an MSP program, they have Microsoft compensates their partners very well. It's a very different sort of model and approach to what's offered at Amazon. And I think it was kind of like showing these guys like, okay, like we're not going to do this in Azure. This is why, this is the benefits of us doing this in AWS. And it was selling these guys that it doesn't, like, we're not going to break the mold. We're not going to kind of, that the skills can still carry over. So that was, I would say that was the challenge in like the technology hurdles. I think for what we're looking to accomplish, like these guys were already bought into containerized development. They were already bought into like microservices versus monolithic development spreads. Like they were, it was like very cool to see like a pretty mature technology team like that embrace these ideas that are pretty like, if leading, if not bleeding edge. And some of the stuff that I was sort of, you know, and that we discussed with you that we were throwing out at the wall, like taking a full serverless approach. So I think it was, the hurdles were more about educating them on what the platform offerings. And it was like doing a lot of, you know, I'm a big fan of putting together matrices when no one can, like, just side by side feature set comparisons. And so I would, I guess they were more soft skill challenges than technology. And I think it's like the whole, I recently gone back and read a bunch of articles that I wrote a few years ago about digital transformation, and like it's like staring back into a vacuum. Like it's crazy. You know, again, like the idea, like infrastructure as a service was in my mind 4 years ago always going to be the biggest part of the cloud. And now 4 years later, I'm like, like why? Who wants to run a server?
Who wants to manage an operating system if you don't have to? So would it be fair then to say that in your previous life, not where you are now, but in your previous life, it sounded like you were really doing more of selling the decisions within the organization on where to go, versus really kind of, I think you said, you called it soft skills. Like, is it fair to say like there was a fair amount of sales type activity within the organization to kind of get the momentum that you needed to have them start thinking about kind of at least, you know, what's possible here? How can we leverage this platform, be it AWS or something else?
And no, for sure. And you know, we worked with Curious Orbit a little bit to tease some of that stuff out when we were talking to you guys early on. But like, absolutely. So it was, I mean, they had some great relationships with companies that did a lot of, they offered like microservices platforms that can be hosted on AWS or hosted on Azure. And it was kind of, there was a ton of sales that had to happen to show them like, like we could pay somebody for sure. We could pay somebody to go and host and manage this for us. And they're going to bill us back for our consumption. But by the way, like we don't have to do any of this. We could build the whole thing serverless, or why were we going to pay somebody else to manage EKS for us, or what, like why do we want to rely on a container service that's managed by like a group of dudes, like 4 people, versus it just being a managed service offered by Amazon, and moving moving that water line. If you think about the security and management of the cloud and security management in the cloud, like where do you want that water line to sit? And I think it was selling people that this is something we could do in Amazon. That was the key thing, and that we could be overpaying by working with the traditional partners that they'd always been working with. And 2 was like we're not like we're a technology company. I think with technology companies, it's always people like default to we're a technology company, so let's build and manage and operate technology. Where it could be like we're a technology company that we maintain this code base and we offer a product and a service, but like we don't have the water line can be pretty high up in terms of what we want our cloud provider to offer, and what we think is a good use of our own time for managing and monitoring now. Like who wants to be woken up by servers at
not
3
me
in the morning anymore? Yeah,
not me.
But
I still wake up every once in a while. It's been a long time since I've had to carry a pager, or a pager, but be on call, right, because of this highly automated platform. But I still wake up every once in a while pretty sure that I'm hearing my phone go off somewhere at 2:00 in the morning. So I still suffer from that and the old ways of, having to care and feed for a server in the middle of the night when suddenly the operating system just decides it's not happy anymore. So I know that.
But you've been there, and I think like I'm sure with your customers, I don't think people understand unless you've been the one to like take a pager call at 3 in the morning, to be the guy who's like, or thinking about like this solution, this infrastructure. It's like not really part of the rest of the support structure in our organization, because we're being really like agile, and we're developing something just for this customer. And it's like the pitfall of that. Like I think when you're negotiating with an executive, whether it's internal or external organization, if they've answered a support call before, it's probably easier to go and convince them like, okay, let's go down this like it's not 2004 anymore, it's not 2007. Like we've all been there. We've all been like, oh man, somebody unplugged the Dell the Power Edge 930. Like somebody unplugged the cable. Somebody's got to go down and plug it back in. Like, is that where we want to be? Like, not that like is that what the best use of everybody's time? I guess
I would argue quite strongly that nowadays it probably isn't. That's what I'm gonna pay AWS to manage that stuff. I don't want to have to think about those physical spaces anymore. Or if somebody does accidentally unplug something, I want them to have to worry about that. As long as my application is still going, then do I really care? I would say probably not. So you also said something interesting there about kind of this idea of the, I can't remember exactly what you said, but the water line, like moving that water line up, and you said you talked a little bit about services. So we're going to come back to that, but I just wanted to kind of, because we're both technical again, and you made me smile as you're talking there, because I think one of the biggest challenges, and let me know if you've experienced this yourself. One of the biggest challenges that I've run into when we're working with some organizations, sort of depends on where they are in their journey, but it's challenging sometimes to convince somebody that instead of just standing up another server in AWS and EC2 instance, let's have a look at some of the services that exist so that we can deliver that same thing, but offload a lot of that work to Amazon, and have fault tolerance and high availability, all that great stuff built in, so you don't have to get up at 3:00 in the morning if that operating system were to fail. Do you see that same thing, like trying to convince, let's not think about servers, let's think about services, and how do we build those services? Is that something you run into a lot?
Yeah, I mean, for this application, this modernizer manager application that we're building, that is exact. Like we went through that process of like how to how to decouple everything. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What services versus servers do we want to stand up? And I think what was, because we're a startup in our current form, what was really helpful was like for me with all the Amazon training that I had at my time at Beanfield and stuff I've done independently was being able to articulate not only there's like the um, human capital that would be required to maintain that stuff if we were going to go and host these servers and manage it ourselves, but then also just like the cost of like you on some of the Amazon services that we're looking at, like like Lambda, we're looking at Amplify for to host the front end. Like there's or DynamoDB. Like there's all these things now where we're kind of breaking everything down and it showing people that like I think, and you've probably done this a lot with your clients. Somebody looks at their AWS bill and there's like 400 or 500 lines, and they don't and like I think that level of detail scares them. Like Amazon wants a very accurate accounting, but that level of detail to somebody who's operated the traditional IT model sort of scares them. And like it was like kind of showing people that no, this transactional kind of billing is our friend,
Yeah.
that like this is to our advantage. We are creating a brand new product. We're creating a brand new service. Sure, we could go and stand up, like MySQL box ourselves, or do all the like we could do all the things that from these services that we're getting from Amazon, and pay for that at a minimum run level.
Yeah.
And fine, we could deploy like auto scaling and leverage a bunch of Amazon services that will allow an application to scale and grow, but there's going to be a minimum footprint. So like when we're in this like startup development mode, it like it was it was important for me to understand like how to communicate what the financial benefits were and to be able to show them the bill. Yes, the bill's complicated, but that doesn't have to be scary. We can
Yeah.
go through this, line by line, and understanding that it's like way to your advantage to develop when you're in that initial phase, um, to develop in that cost model than it is to go and spin up a dev environment and just to blow through a couple grand a month for services that might only cost you a couple $100 if you're just paying for what you're
What
using
you're using.
when no
Yeah.
one's accessing these applications, right? When there's
Yeah.
no data in the database, where you're not taking up that much storage in S3. Like why go and spin up a bunch of IaaS infrastructure and pay for that minimum, that like private light, which will for sure be greater than whatever you're going to use um, uh, with the sort of Amazon as a service model.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's good. Let's talk a little bit more about the serverless stuff you're working on now. You've mentioned, paying for what you use. We talked a little bit about, fault tolerance and availability, all kind of, for the most part, baked into those services. You would always want to understand what that service has available, right? But when you're thinking about serverless now, if I throw that same kind of question that I did earlier to you about your challenges and kind of how you transitioned, when you started thinking about the application that you're building right now, this service that you're creating, what were some of the first hurdles or roadblocks that you ran into there as you were saying, okay, we're not going to build this as a traditional monolithic solution. It's going to cost too much. There's too much maintenance. What did you run into as you started to try to translate that from a traditional solution into this kind of microservices approach?
Yeah, so I think the big challenges initially were not getting into scope creep and really like again, I'm not a software developer, so it was learning um, like what the Amazon API gateway is, how it's used, how Lambda really works, and then what the normal idea that okay, so we're building this application, it's delivered to an end user through a web front end, and there's these modules inside the web application that we're developing so that somebody can go and look at the properties of a commercial building, or they can open up contract properties, and they can there's these data structures that end users need to interact with. It was really understanding like in the serverless world how that normally like how do you glue all that together?
Yeah.
So educating ourselves on that like it's a much different development and architect architectural process than any of the projects I'd been previously been involved in. So it was really, we had to sit down and we had to go, we shared with you all of the swim lane diagrams and all the processes. And it was trying to figure out, okay, we have a high level, here's what we're trying to do from a functionality perspective. And now when something needs to happen on, like somebody clicks a button on a screen, what are the API calls that we need to make to our ticketing platform, which is third party to Amazon? What's the API call we need to make to SAP Business One? How is that going to work? How do we use Lambda to do that? Like, Lambda, you have to provide context to Lambda. How are you going to build that? How are you going to define? And then, so I guess it was looking at the Amazon platform as like in the same way that you look at like .NET. So it's a platform to develop on. Infrastructure as code to develop on, like taking that DevOps approach to the entire platform, the Amazon service platform, and thinking like, not just like, okay, we have a database server over here. We have all these like things that are sort of pre-built and these technologies built and made by people who are not, I guess, not at that service level or layer.
Yeah.
And it was looking at the Amazon platform in the same way that you look at .NET and SQL together. The same way that's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for at a technology company for somebody to digest, when the CEO and the COO who are like super passionate about these projects and like are super passionate about owning IP that we're building.
Yeah.
So like bringing everyone on this journey where we're looking at the Amazon platform and the services that we deliver on top of that, still as like when we have CloudFormation templates, when there's Lambda scripts, all these things that's the IP that we're building, and that is something that you can own. That's tangible. That's tactile. You can own. You can have that code repository of stuff that runs on the Amazon platform, and making sure that everyone in the organization looks at all that and looks at what we're building in the same way that you look at, when application developers 15 years ago look at SQL and .NET as a toolkit for going and IAS as a toolkit for going and building, like doing full stack development.
Yeah.
So that is like, looking at the Amazon platform the same way, like convincing people that like what we're building is IP that we can own and hold and that's value that we're creating. I think that is, again, these are more like soft challenges.
Yeah, they're not technology challenges.
Yeah, and maybe these are not challenges that other, a regular organization goes through. And I know a ton of people work at like Slalom or the big consulting companies. Maybe this is the world that I'm coming from. This is a very new and foreign concept, and maybe what makes these companies so great at what they do is when they've built these born in the cloud application architecture, they've been deploying this for years. This stuff is, just any old Monday for them. So I think that was for an organization and the company that I'm working at, they were traditional managed IT service providers and traditional. They did disaster recovery and backup for some like big Canadian brands. They came together and they formed this new entity, and like it was, I would say like having everybody look at the platform itself as Amazon Web Services itself as your IaaS, .NET, and SQL platform, and not just like, this is a competitive platform to what we do. We own and operate data center space. We can host virtual machines. We have VMware. We have storage. Like we can kind of do all these things, and it sort of like painting the picture that this is different than your normal IaaS kind of architecture, and that what we're doing, we're building software. We're at an abstracted layer from I think where they were used to sort of playing a role in the technology space.
Yeah. So you said something interesting there about kind of just educating yourself on the services. And I know that's a common challenge. It doesn't really matter where you are in the journey. I spend, outside of writing CloudFormation templates, I would say we would spend the majority of our time in the documentation, right? Either for something that we're working on or behalf of customers. I'm interested to know, as you were kind of trying to figure out, how's Lambda going to play a role? How's the API gateway going to play a role? How's DynamoDB going to be used in these solutions? Kind of, can you tell us a little bit about the resources you used? Was it just Amazon documentation? Did you find other things? Because I know people are always interested in kind of, how do I learn more about this stuff? What are some resources that you found helpful for that?
So I think absolutely the Amazon, like the regular documentation, but I think creating, like before we knew specifically what technology we were going to use, we went through like, I can't remember what year of university it was in where we did it, but like it was like a programming class that I took, and it was more just like uh, logic gates and data structures, and the
Yeah.
circle or square decision tree stuff. So
Yeah.
like we started in the Lucid chart and just started creating like what are the data structures that we need to, like what's the information, forget actually even data structure is too, we're putting too much of a box around what we're doing there. So we
Yeah.
sit like, here is a user on this side, here's all the information that we want to collect about the user. In the middle is where we put a box where we figured here's the different places that we want to pipe that data in. And then on the right side of that diagram, it was, inside a database technology, what are all the tables and data fields based on the information that we see over here that we want to see over here,
Yeah.
and written. And then object storage, how are we going to use what the information that we're taking over here, what do we have on the left side that needs to go into object storage on the right. And I mean, and then the same thing with kind of with the swim lane diagram. So having all the different people who needed to log in and work in the portal, and having them mapping out what they need to do on a function level or a decision level, rather than like this application, and we want a window here, because the wireframe stuff that we started to do that we showed you, we did like that was the very last step.
Yeah.
So we started there, and then it was really figuring out, okay, this is how we're going, this is the data we want to capture, this is how we think we want to capture, this is what we think we want to put into a database, and then educating ourselves on the sort of are we going to use like an RDS managed database service for one of the more traditional database technologies? Should we be looking at Aurora? Should we be looking at um, Dynamo, which we ultimately picked Dynamo? Like
Yeah.
it was figuring out what we were going to do and why we wanted to do it, and then figuring out what services sort of work from there. So it was coming through not just the technical documents from like the all the, whether it's the CLI commands or whatever, all the technical documentation. It's also just sitting and actually reading the product documentation and the
Yeah.
service side on the actual Amazon site. Like, if that sounds kind of silly, but like there's a million use cases that they on the website where it's like, here's Jack's business, and here's specifically the things that he's doing,
Yeah.
and we're reading all this stuff. We're like, I think that over here, I think that's what we want to do over here. We said we needed a data structure over here, and I'm reading on this use case. This is specifically what we want to do. So it was picking and pulling that up.
Yeah. Did
And
you look, sorry to cut you off. Did you look at the This Is My Architecture at all? I'm just interested because it's one of my favorite places. Like I'm a big fan of, I don't want to invent something from scratch if I don't have to. And there's tons of really smart people out there that have already done some of this stuff. So we routinely watch the little This Is My Architecture segments and have those moments where like, oh damn, why didn't we think of that? That totally makes sense. Let's go and see if we can use that. Did you do any of that?
so we didn't look at This Is My Architecture, and I think that was for a mistake, because when we went through our first kind of like review when we engaged Curious Orbit as a potential partner for the software development piece, right away you were like, oh, well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? This is actually, you missed this, you got to tweak this. And it was like, yeah, like, I mean, it's so funny because how many, during my time at Beanfield Metro Connect, how many times did we sit with clients or sit with Amazon sales reps and clients and talk about like well-architected designs and
Yeah.
like all, and it's like, here I am on a completely new path, working on at the software architecture layer, and I'm just like, did not think of that. Which,
Yeah.
sometimes when you're like in a box for 6 weeks and like ripping through like a program and service specifications to create to map that out, like the low-hanging fruit was
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
right there the whole
Yeah.
time. And
You
I,
kind of get a little bit of tunnel vision after a
yeah,
while, right? You get too laser
yeah.
focused on something maybe. Yeah.
But we did rely a lot during the like service design process on our Amazon uh, well the customer rep and the customer
Yeah.
architect,
Yeah.
and they gave us a huge head start. So when we're looking at implementing Kinesis video streams and recognition, so that we can give somebody a like sort of like self-scheduled autonomous access to a secure room at a
Yeah.
commercial property. A long time ago, this specific sales team had gone and talked and like they went back to before. I think I don't know if recognition was in beta or how far along the process they were, but they had somebody build out a demo for them 2 years ago, and they were like, by the way, we know that you're going to implement this. Like, here's a cloud formation template. Like, take a look at this.
Yeah.
So
It's probably one of the most overlooked resources, like even as a partner. The Amazon resources that we have access to, whether it's our partner development manager, whether it's, a solution architect, whether it's a subject matter expert, um, those folks are like, they're down in the trench every day doing all this stuff. And I think it's one thing that partners and, even customers probably overlook sometimes as being another really valuable tool in your tool belt as you're building something out, or maybe you've built something, but now maybe it's not quite right. So you've got to iterate a little bit on something, or, the market's just changed. So you have to do that iteration, leveraging those resources rather than trying to comb through just a whole ton of documentation. Those folks are, they might have had your example is perfect, right? They've had some experience. They've seen another customer do something. They might be able to point you in the direction to save you a lot of time.
well, yeah, I mean that's it exactly. They're guaranteed they've done it before with another customer.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, they're
yeah,
the market leaders in terms in like for the cloud overall. So the specific team that we worked with, I think, um, it was one of like the for because we were solving a customer problem, and then it kind of turned into a SaaS solution that we're now going to sell as a partner through the using like built on the Amazon platform. But like this sales rep, I think he was like employee number 4 in Canada.
wow,
So, and I think his first startup got bought by Amazon, and that's how he came to work at Amazon, something crazy like that. So he specifically had probably been through the paces in the ringer way more than even whatever like limited experience I could have picked up at Beanfield for over a 3-year period. Like
yeah,
these, um, the company Amazon is growing, but it's always, I mean, when you can work with somebody who's been around for that long, there's a lot to learn from them. So
yeah,
I think even picking your spots when you're engaging with whether it's a partner rep or a sales rep, somebody who's been around the block for a long time with Amazon, it doesn't sound like, if they were employee number 4, they might have only been in Amazon in Canada for 5 or 6 years or
yeah,
something, but
yeah,
that's like a lifetime. So this person is, and they would have been around when the sales team was, or and the solution architect team was tiny. So
yeah.
who knows how many different verticals and applications and customers that they touched on their way to where we're at now, which is like a large AWS sales and solution architect team across the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. I you mentioned the well-architected framework, and I wanted to come back to that because it's one of my favorite series of documents. And I think there's yeah, I know, it tells you a little bit about how I spend my time. Um, but it's that it kind of goes along with the same thing, is there's these great resources there that can help you build better solutions. Have you started to look at that well-architected framework at this point in your development? Like, are you referencing it already and using it in different ways?
So we're starting to do that when we're working through, obviously, like we're implementing pretty standard architectures for some of the stuff we're doing. So we're going to use Cognito to manage identity and access and federation with other platforms. So like, we would be crazy to not look at what the sort of gold standard is for implementing those services. And you know, when we've been working with you guys and we're thinking about what the next steps are in the application development process, we're getting great feedback just on what, let's say, what the well-architected standard looks like versus what in real world this things does it need to be tweaked based on you know what Curious Orbit or any of the companies we've been working with who work on the Amazon platform. It's always good to be measuring against the what's recommended, what works in the real world, but yeah, not like taking the bold step of thinking like, you know what, we're gonna figure this out. I mean, you save a ton of time. That's and especially if for like a customer facing application, you don't know what you don't know, and not everybody has the security cert, not everybody has the network cert. Like, you're kind of, I think you're playing with fire a little bit to not try and incorporate as much of those templated designs into your own development framework. Just to make sure that you're not leaving a door open or leaving a window open that you need to close to keep your customers' data and your users protected.
Okay. So one last question for you, and it's a little, I always like to ask this. So, you know, you've been working on the platform now for a while, and think about kind of what you know now versus what you knew when you started. And what would be the one thing that you wish you kind of knew earlier in your journey that would have saved you a bunch of time getting to kind of where you are now? What would that one little piece of advice be that if somebody's just starting right today, what would you tell them to do? It's a tough one, right?
Yeah, that is a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big question.
Put you on the spot.
You know what? I think if I look at just like my journey as a cloud architect from start to like from when I started on the Amazon platform myself, like in 2018. So I think I think the most important thing is to not, however you did things, at whatever job you were at before, whatever platform you worked on before, if you're coming from GCP, if you're coming from Azure, or if you're going from Amazon to one of those other platforms, whatever you know, that can't be the letter of record, or that can't be the gold standard for you going forward. I think even look like when Transit Gateway first came out, I was like, you know, transparently, I was like, but like, I like, we could, you know, like all that BGP routing. I worked at a telecom company. I worked like, this was like, and you know, I have buddies at a bunch of the like virtual edge companies and the cloud network companies. Like, I think a lot of us looked at Transit Gateway and were just like, why are they doing this to us?
Like, why? What'd we do?
And I think that now, you know, opening my mind and or just working through problems with customers and doing implementations, like Amazon's not releasing these products for no good reason. Not doing it because they're looking to necessarily step on everyone's toes. They're ultimately, I think, building these solutions and building these products to like bring more customers into the fold, or make things easier, to make things more accessible. Like, not everybody has a BGP routing background. Most people don't. Like,
big challenge.
Like like a lot of this stuff is being created to make it easier, to make it more accessible, to bring more users to the platform. So not pigeonholing myself where everything needed to be like blinders on. This is what I've always done. This is what I know. This is how I
Yeah.
want to do it. That's I would say that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
You're doing something new. You need to embrace new. You need to
Yeah.
embrace change. You need to set goals that force you to look at things the opposite way that you would have done it before. You know, that's because like you're gonna look back 4 years later and you're gonna think, oh man,
Yeah.
why was I so stubborn again
Yeah.
about
Why
not
did I not
embracing?
start this earlier? Yeah.
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 Yeah, otherwise, like it's tough. Like I don't know if there's one thing about this specific journey I mean, I'm sure there's a million things we would do
Yeah.
differently,
Yeah.
but um, but yeah, I think it's really been interesting to see where my priorities in terms of what I think about architecture, or what I think about how applications should be designed or run, how like the times have changed and where the water line needs to lie, or where I want the water line to lie,
Yeah.
where how much that's been yeah, I guess my advice to anybody coming to the platform for the first time, if they're coming from they're an old hybrid cloud network dog like myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, embrace change and read a lot.
Yeah, read a lot. I love it. I know that's a tough question to answer, man, and I think you hit it on the head. Like it's a super flexible platform. You can build anything you want, and I think really to be successful on it, you have to be as equally flexible. So I think that's a fantastic answer, and I'm really happy that you talked about the transit gateway because we're not networking guys, and it's often the thing that we end up scratching our head with the most. And the transit gateway is just it's absolutely fantastic. We use it even in the smallest projects that we have for customers. The transit gateway is playing an important part in there because we're usually connecting a bunch of networks together. So it's also a great example to use.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the network architectures before for transitive routing between VPCs.
Yeah,
Ooh,
yeah,
like,
not
yeah,
fun.
it made more sense to do it outside of the cloud. It just did.
Yeah.
And yeah, now you have a service that's with on the Amazon platform.
Yeah.
So I know now I thought, as I said, I was like, man, I think this is gonna be controversial.
That's awesome.
But yeah, my boys at Megaport and all those guys.
Yeah. I'm sure people are up at night sometimes, but there's a reason that it's there, right? People have obviously asked Amazon for it. That's that idea of, that one of the principles is, customer obsession. So people are wanting these services. They're not building them, like you said, just because they can. They're building them because customers are asking for these types of tools on this platform. That's why they're there. So,
Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time and the insight, and best of luck in your journey as it continues here and building out now in a completely new role, basically doing some software development. So best of luck.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Great
my
chat,
pleasure.
man.
Yeah, take care. All right.